Come to dinner tomorrow night." His heart turned over like the flywheel of the boat, and, for the second time, her casual whim gave a new direction to his life. Part 3. Next evening, while he waited for her to come downstairs, Dexter peopled the soft, deep summer room and the sun porch that opened from it with the men who had already loved Judy Jones. He knew the sort of men they were. The men who, when he first went to college, had entered from the great prep schools with graceful clothes and a deep tan of healthy summers. He had seen that, in one sense, he was better than these men. He was newer and stronger. Yet, in acknowledging to himself that he wished his children to be like them, he was admitting that he was but the rough, strong stuff from which they eternally sprang. When the time had come for him to wear good clothes, he had known who were the best tailors in America, and the best tailors in America had made him the suit he wore this evening. He had acquired that particular reserve, peculiar to his university, that set it off from other universities. He recognized the value to him of such a mannerism, and he had adopted it. He knew that to be careless in dress and manner required more confidence than to be careful. But carelessness was for his children. His mother's name had been Krimslich. She was a bohemian of the peasant class, and she had talked broken English to the end of her days. Her son must keep to the set patterns. At a little after 7, Judy Jones came downstairs. She wore a blue silk afternoon dress, and he was disappointed at first that she had not put on something more elaborate. This feeling was accentuated when, after a brief greeting, she went to the door of a butler's pantry and, pushing it open, called, "You can serve dinner, Martha." He had rather expected that a butler would announce dinner and that there would be a cocktail. Then he put these thoughts behind him as they sat down side by side on a lounge and looked at each other. "Father and Mother won't be here," she said thoughtfully. He remembered the last time he had seen her father, and he was glad the parents were not to be here tonight. They might wonder who he was. He had been born in Keble, a Minnesota village 50 miles further north, and he always gave Keble as his home instead of Black Bear Village. Country towns were well enough to come from if they weren't inconveniently in sight and used as footstools by fashionable lakes. They talked of his university, which he had visited frequently during the past 2 years, and of the nearby city which supplied Sherry Island with its patrons, and whither Dexter would return next day to his prospering laundries. During dinner she slipped into a moody depression, which gave Dexter a feeling of uneasiness. Whatever petulance she uttered in her throaty voice worried him. Whatever she smiled at him, at a chicken liver, at nothing, it disturbed him that her smile could have no root in mirth, or even in amusement. When the scarlet corners of her lips curved down, it was less a smile than an invitation to a kiss. Then, after dinner, she led him out onto the dark sun porch and deliberately changed the atmosphere. "Do you mind if I weep a little?" she asked. "I'm afraid I'm boring you," he responded quickly. "You're not. I like you, but I've just had a terrible afternoon. There was a man I cared about, and this afternoon he told me out of a clear sky that he was poor as a church mouse. He'd never even hinted at it before. Does this sound horribly mundane?" "Perhaps he was afraid to tell you." "Suppose he was," she answered. "He didn't start right. You see, if I'd thought of him as poor, well, I've been mad about loads of poor men, and fully intended to marry them all. But in this case, I hadn't thought of him that way, and my interest in him wasn't strong enough to survive the shock." As if a girl calmly informed her fiancé that she was a widow. He might not object to widows, but... "Let's start right," she interrupted herself suddenly. "Who are you, anyhow?" For a moment Dexter hesitated. Then, "I'm nobody," he announced. "My career is largely a matter of futures." "Are you poor?" "No," he said frankly. "I'm probably making more money than any man my age in the Northwest. I know that's an obnoxious remark, but you advised me to start right." There was a pause. Then she smiled, and the corners of her mouth drooped, and an almost imperceptible sway brought her closer to him, looking up into his eyes. A lump rose in Dexter's throat, and he waited breathless for the experiment, facing the unpredictable compound that would form mysteriously from the elements of their lips. Then he saw she communicated her excitement to him, lavishly, deeply, with kisses that were not a promise but a fulfillment, kisses that were like charity, creating want by holding back nothing at all. It did not take him many hours to decide that he had wanted Judy Jones ever since he was a proud, desirous little boy. Part 4. It began like that, and continued, with varying shades of intensity, on such a note right up to the denouncement. Dexter surrendered a part of himself to the most direct and unprincipled personality he had ever come in contact. Whatever Judy wanted, she went after with the full pressure of her charm. There was no divergence of method, no jockeying for position or premeditation of effects. There was very little mental side to any of her affairs. She simply made men conscious to the highest degree of her physical loveliness. Dexter had no desire to change her. Her deficiencies were knit up with a passionate energy that transcended and justified them. When, as Judy's head lay against his shoulder that first night, she whispered, "I don't know what's the matter with me. Last night I thought I was in love with a man, and tonight I think I'm in love with you." It seemed to him a beautiful and romantic thing to say. It was the exquisite excitability that for the moment he controlled and owned. But a week later he was compelled to view the same quality in a different light. She took him in her roadster to a picnic supper, and after supper she disappeared, likewise in her roadster, with another man. Dexter became enormously upset, and was scarcely able to be decently civil to the other people present. When she assured him she had not kissed the other man, he knew she was lying, yet he was glad that she had taken the trouble to lie to him. He was, as he found before the summer ended, one of a varying dozen who circulated about her. Each of them had at one time been favored above all others. About half of them still basked in the solace of occasional sentimental revivals. Whenever one showed signs of dropping out through long neglect, she granted him a brief honeyed hour, which encouraged him to tag along for a year or so longer. Judy made these forays upon the helpless and defeated without malice, indeed half unconscious that there was anything mischievous in what she did. When a new man came to town, everyone dropped out. Dates were automatically canceled. The helpless part of trying to do anything about it was she did it all herself. She was not a girl who could be won, in the kinetic sense. She was proof against cleverness. She was proof against charm. If any of these assailed her too strongly, she would immediately resolve the affair to a physical basis, and under the magic of her physical splendor, the strong as well as the brilliant played her game, and not their own. She was entertained only by the gratification of her desires, and by the direct exercise of her own charm. Perhaps from so much youthful love, so many youthful lovers, she had come, in self-defense, to nourish herself wholly from within. Succeeding Dexter's first exhilaration came restlessness and dissatisfaction. The helpless ecstasy of losing himself in her was opiate rather than tonic. It was fortunate for his work during the winter that these moments of ecstasy came infrequently. Earlier in their acquaintance, it had seemed for a while that there was a deep and spontaneous mutual attraction that first August. For example, 3 long days of long evenings on her dusky veranda, of strange wan kisses through the late afternoon, in shadowy alcoves behind the protecting trellises of the garden arbors, of mornings when she was fresh as a dream and almost shy at meeting him in the clarity of the rising day. There was all the ecstasy of an engagement about, sharpened by his realization that there was no engagement. It was during those 3 days that, for the first time, he had asked her to marry him. She said, "Maybe someday." She said, "Kiss me." She said, "I'd like to marry you." She said, "I love you." She said, "Nothing." The 3 days were interrupted by the arrival of a New York man who visited at her house for half September. To Dexter's agony, rumor engaged them. The man was the son of the president of a great trust company. But at the end of a month it was reported that Judy was yawning. At a dance one night she sat all evening in a motorboat with a local beau, while the New Yorker searched the club for her frantically. She told the local beau that she was bored with her visitor, and 2 days later he left. She was seen with him at the station, and it was reported that he looked very mournful indeed. On this note the summer ended. Dexter was 24, and he found himself increasingly in a position to do as he wished.